Justice will be served. I am very sure.
Richard stood outside the courthouse at 7:45 in the morning, wearing the only suit he still owned, trying to calm his racing heart. He'd gotten maybe 2 hours of sleep, his mind churning with worry about Keisha and dread about facing Catherine. Dennis stood beside him, reviewing notes and looking concerned. "Remember," Dennis said, "stay calm no matter what Catherine's lawyers say. Don't let them provoke you. The judge is looking for stability, rationality, evidence that you're fit to be around your sons. Getting emotional or defensive will only hurt your case." "I understand," Richard said, though his hands were shaking. He hadn't seen Brandon and Tyler in 6 months, hadn't been allowed to speak to them. Catherine had cut off all contact, claiming it would be too confusing for the boys during the divorce proceedings. Now she was trying to make that separation permanent. They entered the courthouse and made their way to the family court division. As they turned the corner toward the courtroom, Richard stopped, dead. Catherine stood in the hallway with her lawyers, looking elegant and composed in a designer dress that probably cost more than Richard's monthly rent. But that wasn't what made Richard freeze. Standing beside Catherine, looking uncomfortable but determined, were Brandon and Tyler, his sons, 16 and 14 years old. Brandon tall and serious, looking so much like Richard at that age. Tyler smaller, more uncertain, with his mother's features. Both boys Richard had worked so hard to provide for. Both boys he loved more than anything. Both boys who wouldn't meet his eyes. "Brandon, Tyler." Richard's voice cracked. He started toward them. But Catherine stepped between them, her face a mask of concern that Richard knew was completely fake. "Richard, please don't approach the boys. You're frightening them." Catherine's voice was loud enough for the other people in the hallway to hear, loud enough to make Richard look like a threat. "I'm not frightening them," Richard said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm their father. I haven't seen them in 6 months. I just want to say hello." "And that's exactly the problem," Catherine said smoothly. "You're so focused on what you want that you don't consider what's best for them. The boys are here to tell the judge how your instability has affected them, how they feel unsafe knowing their father tried to kill himself, how they're worried you'll drag them down with you." Richard felt like he'd been punched. "You told them I tried to kill myself? You used that against me with our sons?" "I told them the truth," Catherine replied. "That their father stood on a bridge, ready to jump. That only the intervention of a child stopped him. That now that same child has been attacked, putting anyone associated with you in danger. These are facts, Richard. Facts the boys deserve to know so they can make informed decisions about their safety." "Boys," Richard said, looking past Catherine to his sons, "please, can we just talk for 5 minutes?" Brandon finally looked at Richard, and the coldness in his eyes was devastating. "We don't want to talk to you, Dad. Mom's right. You're a mess. You lost everything. You embarrassed us, and now people are getting hurt just from being near you. We're safer without you." The words came out rehearsed, scripted. Richard could hear Catherine's influence in every syllable, but they still cut like knives. "That's not true," Richard said desperately. "I'm getting help. I'm rebuilding my life. I made mistakes. But I'm still your father. I still love you both. More than anything in the world. If you loved us, you wouldn't have ruined our lives," Tyler said quietly. His voice was uncertain, like he was repeating something he'd been told, rather than expressing his own feelings. "You had everything, and you threw it away. Mom says you were reckless and stupid, that you didn't think about how your choices would affect us." Catherine put her hands on both boys' shoulders possessively. "This is hard for them, Richard. Can't you see that? Haven't you hurt them enough? The kindest thing you can do now is let them go. Sign away your custody rights voluntarily. Give them the peace of knowing they don't have to see you, unless they choose to." "Never," Richard said, his voice shaking. "I will never voluntarily give up my sons. You can't manipulate me into abandoning them the way you're manipulating them into abandoning me." "Then I guess we'll see what the judge says," Catherine replied with a cold smile. "Come on, boys. We need to prepare for your testimony." She led Brandon and Tyler away. Tyler looked back once, his expression confused and sad, but Brandon didn't look back at all. Dennis put a hand on Richard's shoulder. "That was brutal. But Richard, you have to pull yourself together. Catherine did that deliberately, knowing it would upset you. Don't let her win. Don't let her see that she got to you. She has my sons, Richard said, his voice hollow. She's turned them against me. How am I supposed to fight that? By showing the judge who you really are, Dennis said firmly. By proving that Catherine is the one manipulating this situation. By demonstrating that you're a good father who deserves a relationship with his children. Can you do that? Richard took a deep breath. Thought about Keisha lying in a hospital bed. About Dorothy working multiple jobs to support her daughter. About people who faced much worse challenges than a difficult custody hearing, and still found the strength to keep fighting. Yes, Richard said. I can do that. They entered the courtroom. Judge Patricia Morrison was already at the bench. A stern woman in her 60s, known for no-nonsense rulings and intolerance for parental games. Richard had heard she was fair but tough. He could only hope that fairness would be enough. Catherine's lead attorney, a shark in a $3,000 suit named Robert Caldwell, stood to present their case. Your Honor, we're here today because Richard Hastings poses a clear and present danger to his minor children. Just days ago, Mr. Hastings attempted suicide. He was only prevented from jumping off a bridge by the intervention of a 7-year-old child. Since then, that same child has been deliberately attacked and seriously injured by persons unknown. The pattern is clear. Richard Hastings attracts chaos and violence. Anyone near him is at risk, including his own sons. Your Honor, Dennis objected. Mr. Hastings did not attack anyone. He's a victim in this situation, not a perpetrator. Punishing him for being targeted by criminals is absurd. He's being punished for putting himself in a position where he could be targeted, Caldwell shot back. For making enemies who are now willing to hurt children. For being so unstable that a 7-year-old had to save his life. Brandon and Tyler Hastings deserve a stable, safe environment. Their mother can provide that. Their father demonstrably cannot. Judge Morrison held up a hand. I'll hear the evidence and make my own determination. Mr. Caldwell, present your case. Over the next hour, Richard sat and listened as Catherine's lawyers painted a picture of him as mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, and potentially dangerous. They brought up the suicide attempt, the fraud scandal, the collapse of his company, the loss of his mansion. Everything Richard had already suffered through was weaponized against him. Then they called Brandon to testify. Richard's oldest son took the stand, looking nervous but determined. Caldwell approached him gently. Brandon, I know this is difficult, but can you tell the judge how you feel about seeing your father? Brandon glanced at Catherine, who gave him an encouraging nod. I don't want to see him. I'm embarrassed by him. All my friends know what happened. They know my dad lost everything and tried to kill himself. They treat me different now. Like I'm damaged because my father is damaged. And are you concerned for your safety if you're forced to spend time with your father? Yes, Brandon said, though he didn't sound entirely certain. Mom says people are trying to hurt him. That little girl got hit by a car because she knew him. What if someone comes after me and Tyler to get to Dad? What if we're not safe around him? Richard wanted to scream that this was Catherine's manipulation, not Brandon's real feelings. But he forced himself to stay silent, to let Dennis handle the cross-examination. When it was Dennis's turn, he approached Brandon carefully. Brandon, when was the last time you actually spoke to your father? Not at court today, but a real conversation? Brandon thought. I don't know. 6 months ago? Before Mom filed for divorce. And in that conversation, did your father ever do anything to make you feel unsafe? No, but did he ever threaten you or hurt you or do anything that made you fear for your well-being? No, but that's not the point. Then what is the point? Dennis asked gently. You say you're afraid of your father, but you haven't spent time with him in half a year. You say you're embarrassed by him, but isn't that because of what other people have told you to feel, not because of anything your father actually did to you? Brandon looked confused, conflicted. I don't know. I just know everything fell apart, and it's his fault. Is it? Dennis asked. Your father was cleared of any criminal wrongdoing in the business scandal. He was a victim of his partner's fraud. He lost everything through no fault of his own. Should he be punished for being a victim? Should he lose his sons because bad things happened to him? Objection, Caldwell said. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Morrison said. But Mr. Crawford, you've made your point. Brandon, you may step down." Brandon returned to his seat next to Catherine, looking more uncertain than before. Tyler was called next, and his testimony was similar, but less confident. It was clear Tyler didn't really understand what was happening, just that Mom said Dad was dangerous, and they needed to stay away. When Catherine herself took the stand, Richard had to grip his chair to keep from reacting. She played the concerned mother perfectly, worried about her son's safety, devastated by Richard's poor choices, just wanting to protect her children from further trauma. "Miss Hastings," Caldwell said, using Catherine's married name even though she'd gone back to her maiden name months ago. "In your expert opinion as their mother, would Brandon and Tyler be harmed by continued contact with their father?" "I believe they would," Catherine said, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "Richard is in crisis. He's suicidal. He's attracted the attention of dangerous people. He has no stable home or income. He can't provide for the boys emotionally or financially. I love Richard, and I hope he gets the help he needs, but until he's stable, I can't risk our son's safety by allowing contact." It was a masterful performance. Richard could see Judge Morrison taking notes, her expression thoughtful. Then Dennis stood for cross-examination, and his tone was sharp. "Miss Hastings, you say you love Richard and want him to get help. Is that why you filed for divorce the day his company collapsed? Before anyone knew whether he'd committed a crime? Before the investigation was even complete?" Catherine's mask slipped slightly. "I filed for divorce because our marriage was already in trouble. The scandal just made it clear we needed to go our separate ways." "Really?" "Because the divorce petition cited irreconcilable differences, not any actual wrongdoing. It seems like you left your husband the moment he lost his money, not because of any genuine concern for your son's well-being." "That's not true," Catherine protested. "Isn't it?" Dennis pulled out a document. "This is a text message you sent to your friend Linda Prescott 3 days after filing for divorce. I quote, 'Thank God I got out before Richard's reputation completely tanked. Now I can claim I left him because he was unstable, not because he's broke.' Perfect timing. Does that sound like a woman concerned about her husband's mental health, or a woman positioning herself to look good in a divorce?" Catherine's face went red. "That text was taken out of context. I was upset and not thinking clearly." "And this Instagram post from last week?" Dennis held up a phone showing Catherine's social media. "You at a charity gala," caption. "Despite my ex-husband's troubles, I'm staying strong for my boys." You're using Richard's suffering for social media sympathy. Is that loving concern? Or opportunistic manipulation? "Objection!" Caldwell shouted. "Miss Hastings' social media is irrelevant to this hearing." "It's completely relevant," Dennis countered. "It shows a pattern of using Mr. Hastings' difficulties to paint herself as the noble, long-suffering ex-wife while undermining his relationship with his sons. That's parental alienation, Your Honor, a form of emotional abuse." Judge Morrison looked at Catherine with new interest. "I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Crawford." Dennis pressed his advantage. "Miss Hastings, you've claimed that Richard is dangerous because someone attacked the girl who saved him. But do you have any evidence that Richard himself did anything wrong? That he intentionally put anyone in danger?" "He put himself on that bridge," Catherine said. "That was dangerous. To himself, yes, not to anyone else. In fact, the evidence shows that Richard has been targeted by people trying to hurt him. He's a victim, not a perpetrator. Yet you're using his victimization as a reason to take away his children. Doesn't that seem cruel?" "I'm protecting my sons," Catherine said, but her voice was less certain now. "Or are you punishing Richard for failing to maintain the lifestyle you wanted? For losing the money and status you married him for?" Dennis leaned forward. "Miss Hastings, your prenuptial agreement states that if the marriage ends due to Richard's fault, you get a larger settlement. If it ends due to irreconcilable differences with no fault assigned, you get much less. Isn't that why you're trying so hard to paint Richard as unstable and dangerous? To increase your financial payout?" Catherine's lawyer objected vehemently, but the damage was done. Judge Morrison was looking at Catherine with obvious skepticism now. When it was Richard's turn to testify, Dennis walked him through the events of the past 6 months carefully. The business collapse that wasn't his fault, the depression that followed, the suicide attempt, and Keisha's intervention. The attack on Keisha and Richard's efforts to support her recovery. "Mr. Hastings," Dennis said, "do you love your sons?" "More than anything in the world," Richard said. his voice thick with emotion. "They're the only thing that matters. I know I've made mistakes. I know I wasn't there for them as much as I should have been when I was building my company. I know losing everything was traumatic for them. But I'm still their father. I still want to be part of their lives. I still have so much love to give them." "And the suicide attempt?" Dennis asked gently. "Can you explain what was going through your mind?" Richard took a deep breath. "I was in the darkest place I've ever been. I'd lost everything. My business, my home, my wife, my sons. I felt like I had nothing left to live for. Standing on that bridge seemed like the only way to end the pain." He paused. "But Keisha showed me I was wrong. She reminded me that my story wasn't over, that I still had value, that I still mattered. She saved my life, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to honor that gift by being a better person, a better father." "And if the judge allows you contact with your sons, what would you do differently?" "I'd actually be present," Richard said. "Not just physically, but emotionally. I'd listen to them, ask about their lives, share my struggles honestly instead of pretending everything was perfect. I'd show them that failure isn't the end, that you can lose everything and still find reasons to keep going. That wealth and status don't define your worth as a person." Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Mr. Hastings, your ex-wife claims you're financially unstable. What's your current living situation?" "I live in a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood," Richard said honestly. "I don't have much money. I'm looking for work but having trouble finding anything because of my reputation. But I'm not giving up. I'm doing interviews to earn speaking fees. I'm reaching out to contacts who might give me a chance. I'm figuring out how to rebuild from nothing." "And if your sons came to visit your apartment, would they be safe there?" "Yes, Your Honor. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. They'd have to sleep on an air mattress in my living room, but I'd make sure they were comfortable and cared for." Catherine's lawyer stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Hastings, you say you want to be a good father. But isn't it true that you're more focused on the girl who saved you than on your own sons? That you spent yesterday at the hospital with Keisha Washington instead of preparing to fight for custody of Brandon and Tyler?" The question was designed to make Richard look like he cared more about Keisha than his own children. But Richard answered honestly. "Keisha was in critical condition after being attacked because of her connection to me. Her mother needed support. I couldn't just abandon them." Richard looked at the judge. "Your Honor, being a good father doesn't mean only caring about your own children. It means showing all children kindness and compassion. I want Brandon and Tyler to grow up understanding that we help people who need help, that we don't turn away from suffering just because it's inconvenient. Keisha saved my life. The least I could do was be there during her recovery." Caldwell sneered. "Very noble. But while you were playing hero at the hospital, your own sons were here, scared and uncertain about their future. Don't they deserve your attention more than some stranger's child?" "They're not mutually exclusive," Richard said firmly. "I can care about Keisha and fight for my sons. I can support Dorothy and still want a relationship with Brandon and Tyler. Love isn't a limited resource that runs out if you share it. That's something I wish I'd learned earlier in life." After 3 hours of testimony, Judge Morrison called a recess. Richard sat in the hallway with Dennis, exhausted and anxious. "How do you think it went?" Richard asked. "Better than expected," Dennis admitted. "Catherine came across as manipulative. You came across as sincere. But judges are unpredictable in custody cases. Morrison is known for putting children's stated preferences first. And both boys said they don't want to see you. Because Catherine has poisoned them against me," Richard said bitterly. "Which is parental alienation, and Morrison seemed to recognize that. But proving it and getting her to rule in your favor are different things." Dennis checked his phone. "We'll have a ruling in about 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. Richard sat outside the courtroom, watching Catherine hold court with Brandon and Tyler, acting like the perfect concerned mother. His sons wouldn't even look at him. Richard's phone buzzed. A text from Dorothy. "Keisha is doing better today. Asking about you. When are you coming back to the hospital?" Richard typed back. "As soon as court is over. Tell her I'm thinking about her." Another text came through, this one from Detective Martinez. "Need to update you on the investigation. Call me when you can." Before Richard could respond, the bailiff called them back into the courtroom. Judge Morrison was at the bench, her expression unreadable. "I've considered all the evidence presented today," Morrison began. This is a difficult case with no clear right answer. On one hand, Mr. Few-time Spear, Hastings, has been through significant trauma and upheaval. On the other hand, he's taking steps to address his mental health and rebuild his life. Miss Hastings presents as a stable parent, but there are concerning indications of potential parental alienation. Richard held his breath. After careful consideration, I'm ruling as follows. Richard Hastings will have supervised visitation with his sons, 2 hours every other week, to take place at a neutral location with a court-appointed supervisor present. This arrangement will continue for 6 months, at which point we'll reconvene to assess whether unsupervised visits are appropriate. Mr. Hastings will also be required to continue therapy and provide proof of employment or stable income. It wasn't everything Richard had hoped for, but it wasn't nothing. He'd get to see his sons. They'd have a chance to rebuild their relationship. Catherine couldn't cut him off completely. Catherine's face was tight with anger. Your Honor, I object to this ruling. The boys explicitly stated they don't feel safe with their father. And I believe those feelings have been influenced by you, Miss Hastings, Morrison said sharply. I'm putting you on notice. If I find evidence that you're continuing to alienate the boys from their father, I will revisit this custody arrangement, and it will not go in your favor. These supervised visits will happen, and you will cooperate fully. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor, Catherine said through gritted teeth. First visit is scheduled for this Saturday at 2 p.m., Morrison continued. Location and supervisor details will be provided by the court. This hearing is adjourned. Richard left the courthouse feeling drained, but cautiously hopeful. He'd get to see Brandon and Tyler on Saturday. It was a start. Maybe, slowly, he could show them who he really was. Maybe he could overcome Catherine's manipulation. Dennis clapped him on the shoulder. Good outcome, considering. Now go to the hospital. Check on Keisha. You've earned a break from this legal circus. Richard took a bus to City General Hospital. Arriving around 2 p.m., he found Dorothy in Keisha's room, looking more rested than yesterday. Keisha was awake and alert, though clearly still in pain. Mr. Richard. Keisha's face lit up when she saw him. You came back. Of course I did, Richard said, sitting beside her bed. How are you feeling? Better. The doctor says I'm healing really well. My legs still hurt a lot, but the medicine helps. And Mama's been here the whole time reading to me. Keisha paused. Did you see your boys? How did court go? Richard was touched that Keisha remembered and cared about his custody battle. I get to see them on Saturday, just for a little while, with someone watching to make sure everything goes okay. But it's a start. That's good, Keisha said. Your boys need their daddy, even if they don't know it yet. Dorothy pulled Richard aside. Detective Martinez was here earlier. She said they have a lead on who attacked Keisha. They're bringing someone in for questioning this afternoon. Who? Richard asked. She didn't say, just that she'd update you when she knew more. Dorothy's expression was troubled. Richard, I need to ask you something. The medical bills for Keisha's care are going to be enormous. More than I could pay in 10 years of working. I know you offered to help, but you don't have much money either. How are we going to afford this? Richard had been thinking about this question. The donations, the GoFundMe people set up after the video went viral. It's up to almost $200,000 now. That's for you and Keisha. Use it for her medical care. But that money was donated to help Keisha as a reward for saving you, Dorothy protested. It wasn't meant for medical bills. Then we'll fundraise more, Richard said firmly. I'm doing media interviews starting next week. Any money I earn from those will go toward Keisha's care. We'll figure this out together, Dorothy. I promise. Before Dorothy could respond, Detective Martinez entered the room, her expression grave. Mr. Hastings, Miss Washington, we've made an arrest in Keisha's case. You need to know who it is before you see it on the news. Who? Richard asked, his heart pounding. Martinez took a deep breath. Your ex-wife, Catherine Hastings. We found bank records showing she paid $50,000 to a man named Derek Price 3 days before the attack. Price has a criminal record including assault. When we questioned him, he gave her up immediately. Said she hired him to hit Keisha with his car. Said she wanted to frame you, make you look dangerous so she'd win the custody battle. Richard felt the world tilt. Catherine, his ex-wife, the mother of his children, had hired someone to run down a 7-year-old girl to score points in their divorce. Are you sure? Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper. Price is testifying against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. We have the bank records, phone records, everything. Catherine Hastings hired someone to deliberately hurt a child to further her own interests in a custody dispute. Martinez looked disgusted. She's been arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit attempted murder. She'll be arraigned this afternoon. Dorothy sank into a chair, her face pale. She tried to kill my baby. Because of a divorce? Because of money and custody, Martinez corrected. She thought if Keisha was attacked, and the media connected it to Richard, it would prove he was dangerous. She'd get full custody and a better divorce settlement. The plan almost worked. The judge almost ruled in her favor this morning, before seeing evidence of her manipulation. Richard thought about his sons, about Brandon and Tyler, whose mother was now in jail for conspiracy to commit attempted murder, about how this would affect them, about the trauma of learning their mother had tried to kill a child. My boys, Richard said. They were in court with her this morning. They testified for her. They don't know any of this. They will soon, Martinez said grimly. This is going to be all over the news. I'm sorry, Mr. Hastings. I know this makes everything more complicated. Complicated didn't begin to cover it. Richard's sons had just found out their mother was a criminal willing to hurt children. They'd testified on her behalf hours before her arrest. Their entire understanding of their parents and the divorce would be shattered. I need to see them, Richard said. Brandon and Tyler. They shouldn't hear about this from the news. They need their father. I'll see what I can arrange, Martinez said. But Richard, you need to understand something. This is going to be incredibly difficult for your sons. They defended their mother today, chose her over you. Now they'll learn she's a monster. That kind of revelation can break a child. Then I need to be there to help them deal with it, Richard said. They're my sons. They need me now more than ever. After Martinez left to make arrangements, Richard sat with Dorothy and Keisha in stunned silence. The woman he'd been married to for 18 years, the woman he'd built a life with, the mother of his children, had tried to have a 7-year-old murdered to win a custody battle. How had Richard missed how cruel Catherine was? How had he spent nearly 2 decades with someone capable of such evil? I'm sorry, Richard told Dorothy. This is my fault. If Keisha hadn't saved me, Catherine never would have targeted her. My ex-wife hurt your daughter because of me. No, Dorothy said firmly. Your ex-wife hurt my daughter because she's a terrible person. That's not on you, Richard. You didn't make her evil. You didn't tell her to hire someone to hurt a child. She made that choice herself. But she made it because of me. She made it because of herself, Dorothy corrected. Because she cares more about money and winning than about human life. That's who she is. You're not responsible for her actions. Keisha reached out and took Richard's hand. Mama's right. You're not the bad guy, Mr. Richard. You're the good guy who got hurt by bad people. But you're still good. Don't forget that. Richard looked at this brave child, lying in a hospital bed because his ex-wife had hired someone to run her down, still offering him comfort and reassurance. Keisha had every right to hate Richard, to blame him for what happened. But instead, she was telling him he was good. You're amazing, Richard told her. Both of you. Dorothy, you've raised an incredible daughter. After everything that's happened, she's still kind, still caring, still wise beyond her years. She gets it from her mama, Dorothy said with a small smile, and from knowing that being bitter doesn't help anything. We can be angry about what Catherine did. We can want justice, but we can't let hate consume us. That's what Keisha's teaching me right now. Richard's phone rang. It was Dennis. Richard? Have you heard about Catherine's arrest? Detective Martinez just told me. The judge who handled your custody hearing wants to see you in her chambers immediately. Catherine's arrest changes everything about the custody situation. The boys can't stay with her if she's in jail. The judge needs to make emergency arrangements for Brandon and Tyler. Richard stood up. I'm on my way. Dorothy, I have to go deal with this. But I'll be back, I promise. Go take care of your boys, Dorothy said. They need you. Keisha and I will be fine here. Richard rushed back to the courthouse, his mind spinning. Brandon and Tyler needed a parent. Catherine was in jail. That meant Richard was the only option. But his sons had made it clear this morning they didn't want to live with him. How would they react to being forced to stay with the father they'd rejected? Judge Morrison was waiting in her chambers with Dennis and a child welfare representative. Her expression was troubled. "Mr. Hastings, sit down. We have an emergency situation. Your ex-wife has been arrested for conspiracy to commit attempted murder. She's being held without bail pending trial. Your sons need immediate placement. They can stay with me," Richard said immediately. "I know my apartment is small, but I'll make it work. They're my sons. I'll take care of them." Morrison looked uncertain. "Mr. Hastings, just this morning, your sons testified that they don't feel safe with you. Are you sure forcing them to stay with you is the right move? We could place them with Catherine's parents temporarily while we sort this out." "No," Richard said firmly. "Catherine's parents enabled her. They raised her to value money over people. They'll just turn Brandon and Tyler into versions of Catherine. My sons need their father. Even if they don't want me right now, I'm still what they need." The child welfare representative, a kind-looking woman named Angela Reeves, spoke up. "Your Honor, I've reviewed Mr. Hastings' case. Despite the suicide attempt, he's been taking steps to address his mental health. He's employed a lawyer to fight for custody. He's shown up to court. He's been supporting the child who saved him. His actions demonstrate responsibility and care. I believe the boys would be safe with him." Morrison thought for a long moment. "All right. Emergency temporary custody is granted to Richard Hastings, pending Catherine's trial and final resolution of the divorce. Mr. Hastings, you'll pick up Brandon and Tyler from their maternal grandparents' home by 6 p.m. today. Child Services will check in weekly to ensure the boys are being properly cared for. Any concerns, and we'll revisit this arrangement. Understood?" "Yes, Your Honor, thank you." Richard left the courthouse in a daze. In less than 12 hours, he'd gone from having supervised visitation to having full custody. His sons, who testified against him this morning, would be living with him by tonight. How was he going to make this work? His apartment had one bedroom. He slept on a pulled-out couch. He had no money for extra furniture or food. But he'd figure it out. He had to. Dennis walked with Richard to his car. "I'll drive you to pick up the boys. You're going to need support for this conversation." They drove to Catherine's parents' estate in the wealthy suburb where Catherine had grown up. The house was massive, a monument to old money and status. Richard had never felt comfortable here, always aware that Catherine's family looked down on him as new money, as someone who'd clawed his way up from poverty. Catherine's father, William Montgomery, met them at the door. His face was tight with anger. "This is your fault," William said without preamble. "Catherine never would have done something so desperate if you hadn't destroyed her life. You took everything from her and drove her to this." "I destroyed her life?" Richard said, incredulously. "I lost my company through no fault of my own. Catherine left me because I was no longer wealthy. She's the one who hired someone to hurt a child. How is any of that my fault?" "You failed," William said coldly. "You were supposed to maintain the lifestyle Catherine deserved. Instead, you embarrassed her, humiliated her, left her with nothing. What was she supposed to do? Not hire someone to murder a 7-year-old, Richard suggested. "That seems like a reasonable alternative." William's face turned red. "Get out of my house. You're not taking Brandon and Tyler. I have lawyers. I'll fight this custody ruling." "You can try," Dennis said calmly, "but Catherine is in jail for attempted murder. Richard is their father and has been granted emergency custody by a judge. You have no legal standing to keep the boys." "Brandon, Tyler," William shouted up the stairs. "Come down here." Richard's sons appeared at the top of the staircase, both looking confused and frightened. They'd clearly heard about their mother's arrest. Brandon's eyes were red from crying. Tyler looked shell-shocked. "Boys, your grandfather is trying to keep you from me," Richard said gently. "But the judge says, you need to come stay with me while we figure everything out. I know you don't want to. I know this morning you said you didn't feel safe with me, but I'm your father. I love you, and I promise I will do everything I can to take care of you." "We don't want to go with you," Brandon said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We want to stay here with Grandpa." "Your mother is in jail," William said bluntly. "She's been arrested for trying to have that girl killed. The one from the video. She hired someone to hit her with a car." "Grandpa, don't," Richard said sharply. "They don't need to hear it like that. They need to know the truth," William shot back. "Catherine did this because your father destroyed her life, because he took everything from her and left her desperate. This is his fault." Brandon looked at Richard with confusion and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Dad didn't make Mom hire someone to hurt a kid. That was Mom's choice. She was desperate, William insisted. So was Dad, Tyler said quietly. Dad was so desperate he tried to kill himself. But he didn't hurt anyone else. He didn't try to kill a little girl. There's a difference. Richard felt his heart crack open. Tyler was defending him. Seeing through William's manipulation. Recognizing that what Catherine had done was wrong. Regardless of her circumstances, "Boys, get your things," Dennis said firmly. "You're coming with your father. That's not up for debate." 20 minutes later, Richard was driving away from the Montgomery estate with Brandon and Tyler's suitcases in the trunk and his two silent, shell-shocked sons in the back seat. The boys hadn't said a word since leaving their grandparents' house. "I know this is hard," Richard said, looking at them in the rearview mirror. "I know you're scared and confused. I know you probably have a lot of questions about your mother and what she did. We'll talk about all of that. But right now, I just want you to know that you're safe. I'm going to take care of you. We'll figure this out together." Brandon finally spoke. "Is it true? Did Mom really try to have that girl killed?" "Yes," Richard said, deciding honesty was the only option. "The police have evidence that your mother paid someone to hurt Keisha, the girl from the video, the one who saved my life." "Why would she do that?" Tyler asked, his voice small and frightened. "Because she thought if Keisha was hurt, it would make me look dangerous. She thought it would help her win custody of you two in our divorce. She was wrong, she was cruel. And now, she's going to face consequences for what she did." "But she's our mom," Brandon said. And now he was crying. How could Mom do something like that? How could she hurt a kid? Richard pulled over to the side of the road, got out, and opened the back door. Pulled both his sons into a hug while they cried against his chest. "I don't know," Richard admitted. "I don't understand it either. Your mother became someone I don't recognize, someone willing to hurt innocent people to get what she wants. But that's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. And you're not responsible for her choices." They stood like that for a long time, Richard holding his sobbing sons on the side of the road, feeling like his family was both breaking apart and coming back together at the same time. Everything was terrible and complicated and painful. But they were together. That was something. Finally, they got back in the car and drove to Richard's apartment. When they arrived, Brandon and Tyler looked around the small space with obvious shock. They'd grown up in mansions. Richard's entire apartment could fit in their old living room. "It's not much," Richard said, "but it's clean and safe. You two can have my bedroom. I'll sleep on the couch. We'll figure out furniture and everything else tomorrow." "We're really staying here?" Tyler asked, looking around at the worn furniture and small kitchen. "For now. Until we figure out what comes next with your mother's case." Richard set down their suitcases. "I know this isn't what you're used to. I know it's a huge adjustment. But we're going to make it work." Brandon was looking at a photo on Richard's small table. It was the only decoration Richard had. A picture of all four of them from 5 years ago. Before everything fell apart. They were at the beach, smiling, looking like the perfect happy family. "Do you remember that day?" Richard asked softly. "Yeah," Brandon said. "We built sandcastles. Tyler kept knocking mine down, and you kept rebuilding it for me. And Mom got mad because sand got in her designer beach bag," Tyler added. They were quiet, all thinking about how different life had been then, how much had changed, how the happy family in the photo had shattered into broken pieces. "Can we visit Mom?" Tyler asked. "In jail?" "I don't know yet," Richard admitted. "We'll have to ask her lawyer." "But Tyler, you need to understand something. Your mother did a terrible thing. She hurt an innocent child. You can still love her, but you also have to recognize that what she did was wrong. Very wrong." "I know," Tyler said quietly. I don't want to lose her completely. Even if she's bad." "You won't lose her completely," Richard promised, "but things will be different now. She'll face consequences for her actions, and we'll have to figure out how to move forward as a family despite everything that's happened." That night, Richard lay on his uncomfortable couch, listening to his sons talk quietly in the bedroom. They were processing their mother's arrest, their changed living situation, the collapse of everything they'd thought was true about their family. Richard thought about how drastically his life had changed in just 4 days. 4 days ago, he'd been ready to jump off a bridge. Now, he had his sons living with him. Catherine was in jail. Keisha was recovering in the hospital. Everything had been turned upside down. Keisha had been right. His story was still in the middle. But what would the ending be? Would his family heal from all this trauma? Would Keisha fully recover? Would Richard be able to provide for his sons and keep them safe? Richard didn't have answers. But he had something he hadn't had in months: purpose. His sons needed him. Keisha needed continued support. Dorothy needed help with medical bills. Richard had people depending on him, and that gave him a reason to keep fighting. His phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. Saw the news about Catherine's arrest. Are you okay? Are your boys okay? Richard typed back, we're surviving. How's Keisha? Sleeping, healing, strong. Like I keep telling you, you're not responsible for what Catherine did. Focus on your boys. They need their father now. Richard sent a heart emoji and put his phone away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Media attention about Catherine's arrest. Questions from Brandon and Tyler. Figuring out how to feed and clothe 2 teenage boys on almost no money. But tonight, Richard's sons were safe. Under his roof, under his protection, that was enough. In the darkness of his small apartment, Richard finally fell asleep. And for the first time in months, he didn't dream about bridges, or falling, or endings. He dreamed about beginnings, about rebuilding, about second chances. About a 7-year-old girl who'd reminded him that every story could have a good ending if you were brave enough to keep living until you found it. Tomorrow would test that belief. But tonight, Richard chose to have faith. The worst might not be over. But maybe, just maybe, the best was still to come. Richard woke up at 5:30 in the morning to the sound of his phone buzzing nonstop. He grabbed it groggily and saw hundreds of notifications, news alerts, social media mentions, missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Catherine's arrest had exploded across every media outlet. The headlines were brutal. Billionaire's ex-wife hired hitmen to target child hero. Woman accused of ordering attack on 7-year-old to win custody battle. Catherine Hastings, from society queen to accused child attacker. Richard's own name was everywhere too. Some stories painted him as a victim of Catherine's cruelty. Others dredged up the old fraud scandal, questioning whether Richard had somehow driven Catherine to such desperate measures. The court of public opinion was divided, loud, and merciless. Richard muted his phone and checked on his sons. They were both still asleep in his small bedroom. Brandon sprawled across the bed, Tyler curled up in a ball. They looked younger in sleep. Vulnerable. Like the little boys Richard remembered from years ago, before teenage attitude and Catherine's manipulation had built walls between them. How was he going to tell them about the media firestorm? How was he going to protect them from the inevitable attention that would follow them everywhere now? Richard made coffee with his cheap coffee maker and sat at his tiny kitchen table, trying to formulate a plan. Brandon and Tyler couldn't go back to their expensive private school. Not with Catherine in jail and the media circus around the family. They'd be mobbed by reporters and classmates asking invasive questions. But Richard couldn't afford private school anyway. Could barely afford to feed 3 people on his non-existent income. He'd have to enroll the boys in public school. Find a way to make his food stamps stretch to cover teenagers who ate like they had hollow legs. Figure out how to be a full-time parent when he needed to be looking for work. The problems felt overwhelming. But Richard thought about Dorothy, who'd been juggling multiple jobs and raising Keisha alone for years. Thought about people who dealt with much worse circumstances every single day and still found the strength to keep going. He could do this. He had to do this. Brandon emerged from the bedroom around 7, looking disheveled and exhausted. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see Mom being arrested. Is it really all over the news? Yes, Richard said honestly. The story is everywhere. Your mother's arrest is big news. Brandon sank into a chair. Everyone's going to know. Everyone at school, all my friends, they're all going to know my mom tried to have a kid killed. You're not going back to that school, Richard said gently. We can't afford it anyway. I'm going to enroll you and Tyler in the public school near here. You'll start fresh, somewhere new. Make new friends who don't know your history. Public school? Brandon looked horrified. Dad, I've been at Riverside Academy since kindergarten. All my friends are there. My whole life is there. Your whole life was there, Richard corrected. But that life is gone, Brandon. I'm sorry. I wish I could keep things the same for you. But I can't. This is our reality now. A small apartment. Public school. Learning to live on very little money. We'll get through it together, but you have to accept that everything has changed. Brandon's face crumpled. I hate this. I hate all of it. I hate that Mom did what she did. I hate that we have to live in this tiny place. I hate that Dad's a failure, who lost everything, and now we have to suffer because of it. The words stung, but Richard forced himself to stay calm. I understand you're angry. You have every right to be. But Brandon, I didn't fail on purpose. I didn't lose our company because I was careless or stupid. I was betrayed by someone I trusted. That happens. Life isn't fair. Bad things happen to good people. What matters is how we respond. How are we supposed to respond to this? Brandon gestured around the apartment. How are we supposed to be okay with living like this? By remembering that this apartment is a palace compared to how many people live, Richard said firmly. By being grateful, we have a roof over our heads and food to eat. By recognizing that wealth doesn't determine worth, Brandon. I know this is hard. I know you're grieving the life you had. But that life was built on things that don't actually matter. Money, status, appearances. Those things can disappear in an instant. What matters is family, character, integrity. Those things last. That's easy to say when you're the adult, Brandon shot back. You got to live the rich life for 40 years. Now you're forcing me and Tyler to be poor, because you messed up. Tyler had woken up and was standing in the doorway, listening. Brandon, stop. Dad's trying his best. At least he didn't try to kill anyone. No, he just tried to kill himself and left us to deal with the aftermath, Brandon said bitterly. Some father. Richard felt the words like physical blows, but he recognized them for what they were. Pain and fear disguised as anger. Brandon was lashing out because he was overwhelmed and terrified. Richard had to be the adult here, had to absorb the anger without retaliating. You're right, Richard said quietly. Standing on that bridge was selfish. I was so focused on my own pain that I didn't think about how my death would affect you and Tyler. I didn't think about leaving you with a mother like Catherine as your only parent. I didn't think at all. I just wanted the hurt to stop. And Keisha saved me from making the worst mistake of my life. She gave me a second chance to be the father you both deserve. I'm trying to use that chance well, but I'm going to mess up sometimes. I'm going to disappoint you. All I can do is keep trying to do better. Brandon didn't respond. Just sat with his arms crossed, his face tight with anger and confusion. Tyler came and sat beside Richard, leaning against his father's shoulder. I'm glad you didn't jump, Tyler said quietly. Even though everything's terrible right now, even though I'm mad at you for a lot of things, I'm still glad you're alive. Richard hugged his younger son, fighting back tears. Thank you, Tyler. That means everything to me. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a while. Finally, Richard's phone rang. It was Detective Martinez. Mr. Hastings, I wanted to update you. Catherine was arraigned this morning. She's being held without bail. The prosecutor is charging her with conspiracy to commit attempted murder, child endangerment, and witness intimidation. If convicted, she's looking at 20 to 30 years in prison. Richard closed his eyes. And Keisha? How does this affect her? She'll have to testify eventually, about what she remembers from the attack, about hearing someone yell your name before the car hit her. But we'll try to make it as easy on her as possible. She's a child, and a victim. The court will accommodate that. What about my sons? Will they have to testify too? Possibly. If Catherine goes to trial, the prosecution may call them to establish her motive and state of mind. But that's months away. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Martinez paused. How are Brandon and Tyler handling all this? Richard looked at his sons. Brandon angry and defensive. Tyler scared and clinging. About as well as you'd expect. They're devastated. Family therapy, Martinez suggested. All three of you need it. Processing this kind of trauma alone is nearly impossible. I'll send you a list of counselors who specialize in family crisis situations. Many offer sliding scale fees for financial hardship cases. After Martinez hung up, Richard looked up the list of therapists she'd sent. Most were still too expensive, but one offered a program for families dealing with incarceration of a parent. Richard made an appointment for all three of them for next week. "We're going to therapy," Richard announced to his sons. "All of us, together, to help us process what's happened and figure out how to move forward as a family." "I'm not going to therapy," Brandon said immediately. "I don't need some stranger analyzing me." "It's not optional," Richard said firmly. "This family has been through massive trauma. We need help dealing with it. Professional help. I'm going. Tyler's going. You're going. End of discussion." Brandon looked like he wanted to argue more, but something in Richard's expression stopped him. Maybe it was the first time in months that Richard had acted like a real parent instead of a distant figure the boys barely saw. Maybe Brandon recognized that his father was actually trying to take care of them now. The doorbell rang. Richard answered it to find Dennis standing there with grocery bags and a sympathetic expression. "Thought you could use some supplies," Dennis said, bringing in the bags. "Eggs, bread, milk, sandwich fixings, pasta, some snacks for the boys. Just basics to get you through the week." "You didn't have to do that," Richard said, though he was incredibly grateful. His refrigerator had been nearly empty before his sons arrived. "Yes, I did." "You're dealing with enough. Let your friends help." Dennis looked at Brandon and Tyler. "Hey guys. I'm Dennis. Your dad's lawyer. I know this situation is rough. If you ever need to talk to someone who's not your dad, I'm around." The boys mumbled thanks. Dennis pulled Richard aside while they unpacked the groceries. "The media is going to descend on you," Dennis warned. "Catherine's story is everywhere. Reporters are going to want interviews with you and the boys. My advice, say nothing. Don't engage. Don't try to tell your side of the story. Let Catherine's actions speak for themselves." "What about money?" Richard asked quietly. "I have almost nothing. How am I supposed to support two teenage boys?" "The speaking fees from those interviews you're scheduled to do next week should help. I've also been talking to some of your old business contacts. A few are willing to give you freelance consulting work, nothing permanent yet, but enough to bring in some income." "And Richard, the GoFundMe for Keisha? People are adding to it specifically to help you too now. They know Catherine cleaned you out. They want to help." "I can't take charity," Richard protested. "It's not charity. It's people recognizing injustice and choosing to help. Let them. You helped Keisha and Dorothy. Now others want to help you. Accept it gracefully." After Dennis left, Richard spent the day trying to establish some normalcy. He took Brandon and Tyler shopping at a discount store for basic necessities, using money from the GoFundMe account, feeling guilty about every purchase, but knowing his sons needed clothes and toiletries. They went to the local public high school to register for classes starting Monday. Brandon was sullen the entire time. Tyler was quiet but trying to be cooperative. In the evening, Richard took them to visit Keisha at the hospital. He'd been going every day and wanted his sons to meet the girl who'd saved their father's life. Keisha was sitting up in bed when they arrived, her legs still in casts but her face much brighter than days ago. Dorothy was there too, looking exhausted but managing a smile when Richard and the boys entered. "Mr. Richard," Keisha lit up. "You brought your boys." "Keisha, Dorothy, this is Brandon and Tyler," Richard said. "Boys, this is Keisha Washington, the amazing young lady who saved my life, and her mother, Dorothy." Brandon and Tyler stood awkwardly, not sure what to say. Finally, Brandon spoke. "Thank you for saving our dad, even though things are complicated." "You're welcome," Keisha said simply. "I know you're mad at him for trying to jump. I would be too if it was my dad. But people make mistakes when they're really sad. Your dad was the saddest person I ever saw, so sad he couldn't see any good reasons to stay alive. I just reminded him of some reasons, and one of those reasons was you two. He didn't seem to care about us much when he was standing on that bridge," Brandon said, his voice hard. "He cared about you so much, it hurt," Keisha corrected gently. "That's part of why he was there. He thought you'd be better off without him. He was wrong, but he really believed it. Sometimes, when you're really, really sad, your brain lies to you, tells you things that aren't true, makes you think everyone would be happier if you were gone. Your dad believed that lie. I'm just glad I could help him see the truth." Tyler was crying quietly. I'm sorry people are being mean to you because of our mom. I'm sorry you got hurt because she's crazy. Your mom being crazy isn't your fault, Keisha said firmly. You can't control what other people do. You can only control how you respond. And you're responding by being here, by being brave, by trying to do the right thing even though it's hard. That makes you good people. Richard watched his sons interact with Keisha and felt something shift. Brandon's anger was still there, but it was cracking around the edges. Tyler's fear was still present, but he was fighting through it. Keisha's simple, honest wisdom was reaching them in ways Richard's words hadn't been able to. Dorothy pulled Richard aside while the kids talked. Your boys are hurting, but they're good kids underneath the pain. Give them time. Give them patience. They'll come around. I hope so, Richard said. Dorothy, I want to help with Keisha's medical bills. The speaking fees I'm earning, I want to put them toward her care. You have 2 sons to support now, Dorothy protested. You need that money. I need to honor the fact that your daughter saved my life, Richard countered. I need to do something good with the second chance she gave me. Please let me help. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. You're a good man, Richard Hastings. Catherine was a fool to leave you. Catherine leaving was the best thing that could have happened, Richard said honestly. I just wish it hadn't taken losing everything to see how toxic our marriage was. How much I'd compromised myself, trying to maintain a lifestyle that made me miserable. They stayed at the hospital for 2 hours. By the time they left, Brandon seemed slightly less angry, and Tyler was actually smiling. The visit had done all of them good. On the bus ride home, because Richard still couldn't afford a car, Tyler said, Keisha's really cool. She's like, super smart for a 7-year-old. She is, Richard agreed. She sees things clearly, in a way most adults never learn to. Mom would have hated her, Brandon said quietly. Because Keisha doesn't care about money or status or any of the things Mom thought were important. She just cares about people being kind to each other. Your mother used to care about those things too, Richard said carefully. Before money and status became more important to her than character. That's what happens when you let the wrong things become your priorities. You lose sight of what actually matters. That night, Richard lay on his uncomfortable couch again, listening to his sons talk in the bedroom. But this time, their conversation was different. Less angry, more thoughtful. Do you think Dad's going to be okay? Tyler asked. Taking care of us when he barely has anything himself? I don't know, Brandon admitted, but he's trying. I can see that now. When Mom told us Dad didn't care about us anymore, I believed her. But being here, seeing how hard he's working to make this terrible situation okay for us, I think maybe she was lying about a lot of things. She definitely was, Tyler said. She told us Dad was dangerous. But Dad's not the one who hired someone to hurt a kid. Mom is. Dad's the one who's trying to help that kid get better. There's a big difference. I'm still mad at him, Brandon said. For losing everything. For trying to kill himself. For all of it. But maybe I can be mad and still give him a chance. Maybe both things can be true. Richard felt tears streaming down his face in the darkness. His son was giving him a chance. After everything, Brandon was willing to try. That was more than Richard had hoped for. The next few days fell into a routine. Richard got up early, made breakfast for his sons with their limited groceries, walked them to their new public school, then spent his days applying for jobs and doing freelance consulting work Dennis had arranged. The pay was minimal, but it was something. In the afternoons, Richard picked up Brandon and Tyler from school, and they'd go visit Keisha at the hospital together. Slowly, painfully, they were becoming a family again. Not the family they'd been before, that version was gone forever, but a new family, built on honesty instead of illusions, on genuine connection instead of expensive possessions, on choosing to love each other despite pain and mistakes and all the reasons they had to give up. Brandon was still angry often, would have outbursts where he blamed Richard for everything. But between the outbursts were moments of surprising tenderness. Helping Richard cook dinner, asking about Richard's job search, telling stories about school that showed Brandon was actually adjusting to his new environment. Tyler was gentler, quicker to forgive, but also more scared. He had nightmares about Catherine. About losing both parents. Richard would sit with him on these nights, holding his 14-year-old son while he cried, promising that Richard wasn't going anywhere, that Tyler was safe, that their family might be broken, but it wasn't destroyed. A week after Catherine's arrest, Richard did his first major interview. A morning show wanted to hear his story. The businessman who lost everything, hit rock bottom, was saved by a child, and was now rebuilding his life while supporting that child's recovery. Richard was nervous about the interview, about being judged by millions of strangers, about saying something wrong that would hurt his sons or Keisha or Dorothy. But he'd agreed to do it because the speaking fee would pay for a month of groceries and help with Keisha's physical therapy costs. The interviewer, a sympathetic woman named Jennifer Blake, asked thoughtful questions about the suicide attempt, about Keisha's intervention, about Catherine's arrest, and how Richard was coping with suddenly having full custody while having almost no resources. Richard answered honestly, about the darkness he'd felt on the bridge, about Keisha's simple wisdom that had pulled him back from the edge, about learning that his marriage had been toxic long before it ended, about struggling to be a good father to sons who had every reason to resent him. "What would you say to other people who are where you were on that bridge?" Jennifer asked. "People who think ending their life is the only option?" Richard looked directly at the camera. "I'd say your story isn't over. I know it feels like it is. I know the pain seems unbearable and permanent. But that's your depression lying to you, telling you things that aren't true, making you believe you don't matter and everyone would be better off without you. Those are lies. Your life has value. Your story has more chapters. And somewhere out there is your version of Keisha. Someone who sees your worth even when you can't. Someone who will remind you why living matters. Don't jump before you meet them. Don't end your story before you see how it could turn out. Please stay. The world needs you, even if you can't see why right now." The interview aired the next morning. By noon, it had been viewed 10 million times online. The response was overwhelming. People sharing their own stories of depression and survival. People thanking Richard for his honesty. People donating to Keisha's GoFundMe and to a new fund that had been set up to help Richard support his sons. But not everyone was supportive. Some people called Richard a hypocrite for giving advice about not jumping when he'd been ready to do exactly that. Others accused him of exploiting Keisha's story for profit. Still others brought up the old fraud scandal, insisting Richard was still a criminal who deserved his suffering. The negative comments hurt, but Richard tried to focus on the positive ones. On the messages from people saying his interview had convinced them not to harm themselves. On the parents who said they were going to check in more carefully with their struggling teenagers. On the people who'd learned from his story that wealth wasn't the same as worth. 2 weeks after Catherine's arrest, Keisha was released from the hospital. Her legs were healing well and she'd started physical therapy. She'd need months of rehabilitation, but the doctors were optimistic about her full recovery. Dorothy threw a small welcome home party in their tiny apartment. Richard and his sons attended, along with Mrs. Chen and a few neighbors who'd become like family to Dorothy and Keisha. It was crowded and loud, and filled with the kind of love that expensive parties Richard used to attend never had. Keisha sat in her wheelchair, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her, and gave a speech that Richard would never forget. "Thank you all for helping my mama and me, for donating money and visiting the hospital and being so kind. I learned something important from getting hurt. I learned that bad things happen sometimes, but good people show up to help. Mr. Richard showed up. Mama showed up. All of you showed up. And that's what makes life worth living. Not having a lot of money or a big house. Just having people who show up when you need them. I showed up for Mr. Richard on the bridge. You all showed up for me in the hospital. That's how it's supposed to work. We take care of each other." Everyone was crying, including Richard, including Brandon, who'd been trying so hard to maintain his teenage cool, including Tyler, who'd become Keisha's devoted friend over the past 2 weeks. After the party, as Richard and his sons walked back to their apartment, Brandon said something that made Richard stop in his tracks. "Dad, I'm sorry. For being such a jerk. For blaming you for everything. For making this harder than it had to be. I was angry and scared, and I took it out on you. But you've been trying so hard to take care of us. To make this terrible situation okay, and I haven't been making it easy." Richard hugged his son tightly. "You had every right to be angry. You lost your home, your school, your mother, your old life. All in a matter of weeks. That's traumatic. You're allowed to be a jerk sometimes while you process that. I'm just glad we're figuring out how to be a family again." "Me too," Brandon said. And Dad, I'm glad you didn't jump, even though everything's hard now. Even though we're poor, and living in a tiny apartment, and eating mac and cheese for dinner half the time, I'm still glad you're here. So am I, Tyler added. Keisha was right. You needed to stay for the good ending. And maybe this is the good ending. Not the one we expected. Not the one with money and fancy stuff. But the one where we actually care about each other. Where we're a real family instead of just people who happen to live in the same house. Richard felt his heart so full it might burst. His sons were giving him the absolution he hadn't known he needed. The forgiveness he didn't deserve but was receiving anyway. Grace, freely given, because love didn't require perfection. A month after Catherine's arrest, Richard got a real job. Not anything glamorous, a position at a nonprofit helping other people rebuild their lives after financial collapse. The pay was modest but steady. Enough to move his family from the tiny apartment into a small 2-bedroom rental. Enough to buy groceries without anxiety. Enough to contribute significantly to Keisha's ongoing medical costs. It wasn't the billionaire lifestyle Richard had known, but it was honest work helping real people. Work that made Richard feel like his life had purpose beyond accumulating wealth. Work that his sons could be proud of. Brandon and Tyler were adjusting to public school, making friends, learning that expensive private education hadn't actually made them better than anyone else. Discovering they were just regular kids who'd been given advantages they hadn't earned, and that losing those advantages didn't make them lesser. Keisha's physical therapy was going well. She'd graduated from a wheelchair to crutches. The doctors said she'd be walking normally within 6 months. Her spirit remained unbroken. She still talked about becoming a doctor someday. Still believed every story could have a good ending if you were brave enough to keep going. Catherine's trial date was set for 6 months out. She'd rejected a plea deal, insisting she was innocent despite overwhelming evidence. Her lawyers were building a defense around temporary insanity brought on by the stress of divorce. Richard doubted it would work, but that was Catherine's problem now, not his. The divorce had been finalized. Catherine had no custody rights and no claim to any of Richard's future earnings. The prenuptial agreement had been voided due to her criminal actions. She'd get nothing. She'd destroyed her life for nothing. Richard felt pity for her, but mostly he felt grateful that his sons were away from her influence. That they were learning different values. That they were becoming good men, instead of entitled, status-obsessed versions of their mother. 3 months after standing on that bridge, Richard found himself at another bridge. But this time, he wasn't alone, and wasn't planning to jump. He was there with Brandon, Tyler, Dorothy, and Keisha, who was walking slowly on her crutches, but walking. They'd come to mark the anniversary of the day that had changed all their lives. The day Keisha had saved Richard. The day that had led to everything else. The viral video, Catherine's arrest, the family reunification, the new beginning. "I want to say something," Keisha announced, balancing carefully on her crutches. "Mr. Richard, 3 months ago, I told you that you were in the middle of your story and needed to stay to see how it ended. Do you remember?" "I remember," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "Well, I still don't think you're at the ending yet. I think you're just starting a new chapter. One where you help other people the way I tried to help you. One where you're a good dad to Brandon and Tyler. One where you use your second chance to do good things in the world. That's going to be your ending someday. But not for a long time. You've got a lot more chapters to write first." Richard knelt down to Keisha's level. "You saved my life. Not just physically by talking me down from this bridge, but in every way that matters. You showed me what it means to be brave, to be kind, to care about others, even when you're struggling yourself. You're 7 years old, and you taught me lessons I should have learned decades ago. Thank you doesn't begin to cover what I owe you." "You don't owe me anything," Keisha said firmly. "You just have to keep living a life worth saving. That's the only payment I want." They stood together on the bridge, this unlikely family bound together by tragedy and choice. Richard and his sons, Dorothy and Keisha. 5 people who'd been strangers 3 months ago and were now connected by love and shared trauma and the decision to help each other survive. "Should we say something?" Tyler asked, "like a ceremony or something?" "I've got something," Brandon said. He pulled out a piece of paper and read from it. "This bridge was where my dad almost died, where he thought his story was over, but it was really where his story began again, where Keisha showed him that giving up was wrong, where he learned that the ending isn't over until you choose to stop writing it. So we're here to say thank you to this bridge for holding Dad up, to Keisha for saving him, to the universe for giving our family another chance, and to Dad for choosing to stay and be our father even when it was hard. Richard was crying openly now. Dorothy was crying. Even Keisha had tears streaming down her face. They held hands, standing in a circle on the bridge, marking the spot where death had almost won but life had prevailed. "One more thing," Richard said. "I want to make a promise, not just to Keisha, but to all of you. I promise to use the rest of my life well. To help others the way I've been helped. To be present for my sons. To support Dorothy and Keisha however I can. To remember that wealth is measured in love and purpose, not money. To never forget how close I came to throwing it all away. And to honor the gift of life that Keisha gave me by living fully, honestly, and generously. That's my promise. That's how I'll say thank you." They left the bridge together, walking toward whatever came next. Richard didn't know what the future held. More challenges, certainly. More struggles. More moments of doubt and fear. But also more moments of joy, more connection, more reasons to keep going. 6 months later, Richard stood in a courtroom again. But this time, it wasn't his custody hearing. It was Catherine's trial. He'd been called to testify about their marriage, about the divorce, about Catherine's state of mind. Brandon and Tyler were there too, though they hadn't been required to testify. The judge had ruled their testimony unnecessary, given the overwhelming physical evidence. But they'd wanted to come, to see their mother face justice, to close that chapter of their lives. Catherine looked different. Thinner, harder. Prison had stripped away the polished exterior Richard had known, revealing someone he didn't recognize. When she took the stand, she claimed temporary insanity, claimed Richard had driven her to desperation, claimed she'd only wanted to protect her sons from a dangerous father. The jury didn't believe her. How could they, when the evidence was so damning? Bank records showing payment to the hitman, phone records showing coordination of the attack. The hitman's own testimony detailing Catherine's instructions to hurt Keisha badly enough to make the news but not quite kill her. The verdict came back in 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Catherine was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with possibility of parole after 15. Richard felt no satisfaction in her conviction. Just sadness that it had come to this. That the woman he'd married, the mother of his children, had become someone capable of such cruelty. After the sentencing, Brandon asked if they could visit their mother in prison. Richard was surprised, but agreed. The boys needed closure. Needed to say goodbye to the mother they'd known, and accept the reality of who she'd become. The prison visit was heartbreaking. Catherine tried to play the victim, telling her sons that Richard had destroyed their family, that everything was his fault, that she'd only been trying to protect them. But Brandon cut her off. "Mom, stop. Just stop. You hired someone to run over a 7-year-old girl. You did that. Not Dad. You. And you did it for money and custody, not to protect us. We know the truth now. We know what kind of person you are, and we're here to say goodbye, not forever, but for now, until you can take responsibility for what you did and become someone better." Catherine had no response. For the first time in her life, she had no manipulation, no excuse, no way to twist the narrative. She just sat there, defeated, while her sons walked away. In the prison parking lot, Tyler asked, "Do you think she'll ever change, ever become a better person?" "I don't know," Richard admitted. "Some people never do. They're too proud to admit they were wrong, too invested in their own narrative to see the truth. But that's her journey now, not ours. We've got our own path to walk." That path led to good places. Richard's work at the nonprofit was fulfilling in ways his billionaire business ventures never had been. He was helping people rebuild from bankruptcy, teaching them the lessons he'd learned about measuring worth in ways other than money. Brandon had decided he wanted to study psychology, to understand what had made his mother capable of such cruelty, and help prevent others from going down that path. Tyler wanted to be a doctor, inspired by Keisha's resilience and the medical team that had saved her life. Keisha had fully recovered, was walking normally, playing with friends, still wise beyond her years but also finally getting to be a kid again. She'd become something of a local celebrity, speaking at schools about kindness and empathy and the importance of helping others. Dorothy had been able to cut back to just one job. Thanks to the donations and Richard's ongoing financial support, she'd gone back to school part-time, working toward a nursing degree. Richard had encouraged her, reminding her it was never too late to pursue deferred dreams. 2 years after that day on the bridge, Richard was invited to speak at a conference about resilience and recovery. He stood on a stage in front of 500 people and told his story. All of it, the wealth, the fall, the fraud scandal that wasn't his fault, but destroyed him anyway. The bridge, Keisha, Catherine's cruelty. The long, difficult journey back to something resembling stability. I used to think success meant having the most money, Richard told the audience, having the biggest house, the most expensive cars, the most impressive business empire. I spent 40 years chasing that version of success. And when I achieved it, I was miserable, empty, lost, because I'd been climbing the wrong ladder, measuring myself by the wrong metrics. It took losing everything to understand what actually matters. Family, not the fake version I had with Catherine, where we lived together but never really knew each other. But real family. The kind where you're honest about struggles, where you support each other through hard times, where love isn't conditional on success or wealth. It took a 7-year-old girl to teach me about courage, about looking at someone in pain and choosing to help instead of walking away, about believing in possibilities even when they seem impossible, about remembering that every story has more chapters if you're brave enough to keep writing them. And it took hitting absolute rock bottom to learn about grace, about accepting help from others without shame, about recognizing that needing support isn't weakness, it's human, about understanding that how you treat people on your way up matters, because those same people might be the ones who help you when you're down. Richard paused, looking out at the faces, watching him. If you're in the middle of your own dark chapter right now, if you're standing on your own version of that bridge, deciding whether to jump, if you've lost everything and can't see a path forward, I want you to know, your story isn't over. This is the middle. The hard part. The part that tests you. But if you keep going, if you're brave enough to see what comes next, you might discover that losing everything was actually finding what matters. I'm not a billionaire anymore. I'll probably never be wealthy again. I live in a modest apartment with my 2 sons. I work a regular job helping other people rebuild from financial collapse. I spend my free time supporting a single mother and her remarkable daughter who saved my life. I have no luxury cars, no vacation homes, no impressive status symbols, and I've never been happier, never felt more purposeful, never understood my own worth as clearly as I do now. Because I learned that your value isn't in your bank account. It's in the lives you touch, the people you help, the kindness you show, the courage you demonstrate, the grace you extend, the love you give freely without expectation of return. That's what makes a life rich. That's what makes a story worth telling. Keisha Washington, if you're watching this online like I asked you to, thank you. Thank you for seeing value in a stranger. Thank you for having the courage to intervene when you could have just walked past. Thank you for reminding me that every story needs more chapters. Thank you for being the most important person in my life, even though you're just a 9-year-old kid who happened to be on a bridge at the right time. And to everyone else, be someone's Keisha. Look around for people who are struggling, who are standing on their own bridges, who need someone to remind them that their story isn't over. You might save a life. You might change everything. You might be the reason someone chooses hope over despair. The audience gave Richard a standing ovation. But the real reward came later. When Richard checked his phone and found a text from Keisha. I'm not just a 9-year-old kid, Mr. Richard. I'm your 9-year-old kid. Kind of like a daughter you didn't give birth to. And I'm proud of you for telling your story. You're helping people. That's what you were supposed to do with your second chance. You're doing it right. Richard smiled through his tears. Keisha was right. He was doing it right. Not perfectly. He still struggled sometimes. Still had moments of doubt and fear. Still worried about money and his son's future and whether he was being a good enough father. But he was trying, showing up, doing the work, choosing hope even on hard days, helping others because others had helped him, living a life that honored the gift Keisha had given him on that bridge 2 years ago. That night, Richard sat with Brandon and Tyler in their living room. They were doing homework, while Richard reviewed resumes of people applying for help from his nonprofit. Normal, domestic. Nothing glamorous or impressive. "Dad," Brandon said suddenly, "I'm writing a college essay about the most influential person in my life. Can I write about you?" Richard was surprised. "Your essay would be about me? About you and what happened? About how you lost everything and wanted to die but didn't? About how you rebuilt from nothing? About how you taught Tyler and me that failure isn't the end, it's just a chapter? About how you're not perfect but you keep trying to be better? Is that okay?" Richard's vision blurred. "That's more than okay. That's the greatest compliment anyone's ever given me." "You're a good dad," Tyler added. "Not because you give us a lot of stuff, because you don't. But because you're here, you're present, you listen, you care. You show us how to be good people by actually being one yourself. That matters more than money ever did." Richard hugged both his sons. These young men he'd almost abandoned, who'd almost lost their father to despair, who'd been forced to grow up too fast because of their parents' failures, but were becoming incredible people despite it all. This was the good ending Keisha had promised. Not wealth or fame or status, but love, purpose, connection, a family that had been broken and was slowly, painfully, beautifully healing. Sons who were proud of their father not for what he had but for who he was, a life built on meaning instead of money. Richard thought about the man who'd stood on that bridge 2 years ago, the desperate, broken billionaire who thought he had nothing left. Richard barely recognized that person now. So much had changed. So much had been learned through pain and loss, and the kindness of strangers who became family. If Richard could go back and tell that man on the bridge anything, it would be simple: hold on. Just hold on a little longer. Because a 7-year-old girl named Keisha is about to save your life. And once she does, you'll discover that the story you thought was ending was actually just beginning. You'll lose everything you thought mattered and gain everything that actually does. You'll be poor in money but rich in love. You'll struggle daily but find purpose in the struggle. You'll be broken but learn that broken things can be mended into something even stronger than before. Hold on. The good ending is coming, but you have to stay alive to see it. Richard had stayed, and the ending had been better than he could have imagined. Not perfect, not easy, not the fairy tale where the bankrupt billionaire regains his fortune and everyone lives happily ever after. But real, honest, full of genuine love and hard-won wisdom, and the daily choice to keep trying, even when trying was difficult. That was enough, more than enough, everything that mattered. Richard looked at his sons, healthy and whole, and growing into good men. Thought about Keisha, recovered and thriving and still changing lives with her simple wisdom. Thought about Dorothy, strong and resilient, and proof that single mothers working multiple jobs were the real heroes. Thought about the life he'd built from ruins, the family he'd found in unexpected places, the second chance he'd been given and was using well. This was success. Not measured in dollars or status or possessions, but measured in lives touched, in kindness shown, in courage demonstrated, in grace extended, in love given freely. This was the good ending, and it was only possible because one 7-year-old girl had seen a desperate man on a bridge and chosen to care. Had reminded him that every story had more chapters if you were brave enough to keep writing them. Thank you, Keisha. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for changing everything. Thank you for being exactly who you were, at exactly the right moment. And to everyone else who'd ever felt like Richard had felt on that bridge, stay. Please stay. Your Keisha is coming. Your good ending is waiting. Your story isn't over. It's just beginning.